This next review is on pressure. So we're going to deal with pressure in this course and throughout the sophomore courses. So we just want to have a quick review on pressure. Pressure is simply the measure of force. All fluids, whether they're liquid or gas, exert some sort of force on objects. When they're pushing down on them, they're just simply exerting that force. And when we talk about pressure, we're just measuring the amount of force per area. So that's just simply what pressure is, force per area. And the most common unit of pressure that you might encounter is PSI, which is simply pounds per inch squared. And that's simply what PSI stands for. Other units we may encounter are kilopascals or pascals. We have torr, bar, atmosphere, etc., etc. So there's lots of different units that we may encounter in this course. In normal everyday life, the bar or the atmosphere are the most common for measuring atmospheric pressure. So if you're outside on a sunny day or whatnot, outside on a cold day, the pressure outside is usually about 1 atmosphere. And it may be a little more, it may be a little less, depending on the temperature and the elevation and the weather and so forth. But about 1 atmosphere is the pressure outside in normal everyday weather. And that's about equal to 1 bar. It's not exactly 1 bar, it's about equal to 1 bar. There's a slight difference between the two. In other units, 760 torr is equal to 1 atmosphere, and we could look it up what it is in other units. A common unit is, and if we look at common unit in PSI, 14.7 PSI, and so forth. And so we can just simply convert between all these different units, but just remember 1 atmosphere is about the typical pressure outside on here on Earth. One other point I want to talk So one other final concept I want to talk about is gauge pressure. When we measure the pressure, there's 2 types of ways that we can measure it. We can measure it absolute, and the other is gauge. And gauge pressure simply means that we are measuring our pressure relative to atmospheric pressure. So pressure absolute is equal to pressure gauge plus pressure atmospheric. And the reason why we often use this is because the different devices may not measure the absolute pressure, but they'll measure the pressure, how different it is from atmospheric pressure. So you may read a pressure meter that says 0.01 atmosphere gauge, which means that we need to know what the atmospheric pressure is to add to the gauge pressure to get the absolute pressure. And again, the absolute pressure is just the total pressure exerted by that fluid. The gauge pressure would be the pressure that the device is measuring, and then the atmospheric pressure would be the pressure that's in the atmosphere. And again, depending on where you're at, it may be 1 atmosphere, it may be a little above or a little below 1 atmosphere, and by knowing the local weather conditions, you'll know what the atmospheric pressure is. So again, we may encounter the gauge pressure sometimes. If you're given the gauge pressure, you just have to add the atmospheric pressure to convert it to the absolute pressure that would be useful for calculations that we may do.